welcome back to Christmas Countdown, 25 Days of Christmas with Aunt C. We have 5 days until Christmas. Isn't that exciting? So exciting. Did you know that today is National Christmas Caroling Day? What is your favorite Christmas carol? Ooh, I like that one too. All right, we're gonna read a really fun story about one of my favorite Christmas carols. This one's called Silent Night. A Christmas Carol is Born. So let's read about one of my favorite Christmas carols. It is by Maureen Brett Hooper. Franz Gruber lit the candles on either side of the St. Nicholas Church organ. He slid along the bench until he sat before the keyboard. The organ pipes sparkled like a million jewels above him. In the flicker of the candles, Franz studied the music. He could hear it in his head. He could feel it in his fingers. It was music written by Bach, a great composer. Tomorrow night we will have wonderful Christmas Eve service, he thought. And Franz warmed his hands and prepared to practice. A boy from the village school stood in his regular place behind the organ. He was there to work the bellows. The boy stepped on the pedals and began to pump. Up and down went his feet. He forced the air into the organ pipes. Franz began to play, but instead of the beautiful music that usually rose from the old organ, there came a terrible wheeze. The boy held his ears. Franz slipped from the organ bench to stand beside the boy. He studied the bellows. "They are leaking," he said. "The pipes can't make music. There's not enough air." "Can't we repair them?" asked the boy. "Not before tomorrow night," said Franz. He shook his head. "I was worried this would happen. The dampness from the spring flood has rotted the leather. These old bellows are beyond hope," Franz frowned. "I must tell Father Joseph we will not have an organ music for the Christmas Eve service." That night, Franz paced the floor in his family's small living quarters above the schoolhouse where he taught. His children had gone to bed. The snore of the cat and the clink of his wife's knitting needles were the only sounds in the room. Mrs. Gruber stopped her knitting and studied the worried look on her husband's face. She wished she could help. "Is there anything we can do about the organ?" she asked. "Nothing," replied Franz. "I sent a message to the organ repairman in Salzburg, but I'm sure he will be too busy with the great organ in the cathedral to worry about our little organ. This will be a sad Christmas Eve for the people at St. Nicholas Church." Franz said no more. Mrs. Gruber went back to her knitting. Suddenly, a knock at the door interrupted the silence. Mrs. Gruber set aside her needles. Franz hurried to the door. There stood Father Joseph from St. Nicholas Church. "God's greeting," Franz said. Franz was pleased but surprised to see his friend out so late. "God's greeting," said Father Joseph, greeting Franz in return. Franz opened the door wider. Come in," he said. "It's a cold night tonight for such a long walk." Father Joseph smiled as he entered the room. He nodded to Mrs. Gruber. "Good evening, Frau Gruber," he said. He turned to Franz. "I am sorry to come so late, but something important happened and I couldn't wait," he breathed. His breath came in short puffs as he walked up the valley. Franz searched Father Joseph's face. The priest came in and sat beside the fire. He warmed his hands in the halo of its heat. "I was preparing for my service, my thoughts filled with the first Christmas. Then a most mysterious thing happened. The words of a simple poem I wrote years ago suddenly came back to me." Father Joseph took a piece of paper from his pocket and offered it to Franz. "Here, I have written down the words for you. Do you think you can find a melody in time for the Christmas Eve service?" He smiled. "Maybe we'll have a special music after all." Franz shook his head. "No melody I write will take the place of Bach." Still, he took the paper from Father Joseph. Much later, Franz sat at his desk. An empty sheet of music paper lay before him. Only the tick of the clock was there to keep him company. Over and over, he squeezed his eyes shut, trying to hear melody. But there was nothing. "It is hopeless," he murmured. Franz left his desk and went to the window. He gazed out into the night. Father Joseph's words echoed through his night. "Silent night," they said. "Holy night." Outside, the moon glided in and out of the clouds. Great shadows played hide-and-seek across the village roof and over the snowy hills. The night was still. All at once the organist's head filled with melody. Quickly he turned and picked up his pen. He dipped it into the pot of ink and began to write. It was time for Franz Gruber to walk to St. Nicholas's church. Soon the Christmas Eve service would begin. He bundled up against the cold. "Mama, I must go now," he said. He kissed his wife goodbye. "We will follow in a little while," she replied. "Papa, do you have your new song?" little Hans asked. Franz patted his pocket and smiled at his young son. "Papa, how will you make the music without the organ?" asked Maria. "You will see," Franz teased his daughter. Franz found Father Joseph at the parish house next to the church. Father Joseph sat before his fire. The coals burned brightly in the grate. "Ah, Father Joseph," Franz said. He unbuttoned his greatcoat. He reached into his pocket. "Here is your melody." Father Joseph studied the music. A smile spread across his face. "It is as if the words and melody belonged together." Franz lowered his eyes. "I don't know where I found the melody," he said. "Nor I the words," replied Father Joseph. The bells rang in the church tower, calling everyone to the Christmas Eve service. Families came. Children led the way. "God's greeting," they called to each other, "and a blessed Christmas." Their lanterns twinkled across the mountainside. With hushed voices, they entered the church. Inside, the Christmas candles glowed. The children smiled at the beautiful sight. Mothers and fathers smiled too. They all took their seats. "Where is the music?" someone asked. Mrs. Gruber, Hans, and Maria sat in the front pew. Their eyes were bright with excitement. They had a secret. Father Joseph stood high in the pulpit. "We will not hear the organ tonight," he said, "and we will miss it. Nevertheless, we will have music, for Franz Gruber and I have written a carol just for this night." Father Joseph stepped from the pulpit. He picked up his guitar. Gently, he plucked the accompaniment. His high tenor voice sang the melody. Franz joined him. His deep voice sang the harmony. "Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright, round yon virgin mother and child, holy infant, so tender and mild, sleep in heavenly peace, sleep in heavenly peace." The people listened. Soon they began to hum. Their hearts overflowed with joy. A light much greater than the candle in the church filled the church. Father Joseph nodded his approval. Franz beamed. Mrs. Gruber and the children clasped their hands in delight, for they all understood. On that Christmas Eve, a carol was born. That was a good story, right? The organ wouldn't work for the church service, so the Father Joseph and the musician at the church got together and they wrote a song just for that Christmas Eve service. Do you guys go to a Christmas Eve service at your church? I do at mine. We usually hold candles and we sing all together, and it's really special. I'm glad that they were still able to have music at their Christmas Eve service, because music is a really important part of Christmas. It's not the most important part, but it's still really fun to have music.